Hello, and welcome to Expert Subjects Weekly Podcast. This week, we'll be discussing writers' groups. Writers' groups are one effective way to combat being blocked, a subject we've already explored, and some of you may have tuned in or read about this topic on our website. If not, please feel free to check it out. Have you ever been part of a writers' group or started one yourself? If so, then you'll know the benefits of belonging to a constructive and supportive group. If not, a writers' group is something you should really consider. Two famous monsters, Frankenstein and Dracula, were created from a writers' group in 1816. The writers in this group were Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, John Polidori, and Claire Clairmont. They took part in a contest. This is a perfect example of what writers can produce when they come together. How many of you have attended a writers' conference? There's so many excellent workshops, but sometimes they're costly or too far away. You may have found the time and finances to attend a worthy program, only to be disappointed with the instruction. I was lucky to land at both Sarah Lawrence and Skidmore, where I studied with strong and talented writers who also knew how to teach the craft. But if you don't have this opportunity, then belonging to a writers' group can be key for you in terms of affordability and convenience. The benefits of being critiqued and critiquing others are undeniable, and if you do belong to a writers' group, you know that socializing with others who write is essential. So how do you start a group of your own? Maybe you already know a scattering of writers who long to be drawn together into a group. If this isn't the case, don't worry. There are many ways to pull a group together. Think about taking out a small ad in a local paper or post a notice on the bulletin board of a library, a coffee shop, a school, a community center, or even spread your news by word of mouth or online. After you see how many writers are interested in joining, you need to determine the size of your group. This is up to you. I find that a smaller group is more intimate and more manageable. A group of 6 at most gives you time to critique each person each time you meet. This number will be arrived at by you with a little trial and error. You may start off with too many and see that by natural attrition some members slip away, and in the end you are left with like-minded writers who form a cohesive group. Once you have your members, you need a place to meet. Some groups vary where they meet, while others like consistency. If one writer has a quiet and spacious home, this can be your solution, and if not, there are many other options. If you ask ahead of time and do a little planning, you may find a school, library, coffee shop, or bookstore to accommodate you. Parks can also be a fine place to meet if weather and time permit. Although you may vary where you meet, consistency and time is important. This can be the most difficult part and needs to be determined by your members and whether they are working full-time or they're home raising children. As well as choosing the time of day to meet and the day of the week, you need to decide how often. Don't start off being overambitious. Writers need time to produce and circulate their work. Every 3 weeks can be without stress since it gives you 2 weeks to write and a week to critique. If you want more contact with the group, you can always meet up casually for a movie or to discuss a book you've all decided to read. Now, have you given thought to what sort of writing will be focused on in your group? Do you care about genre? Do you only want fiction writers, or can someone working on an academic text or creative nonfiction be part of your group? Having a diverse group of writers can broaden the scope of the feedback, so don't panic if this happens. Once all the logistics have been figured out, you need to decide how to structure the group. The 2 main groups I've been part of these past 20 years were people who became close friends. We found ourselves caring about one another's growing children and careers, vacations, so we decided to dedicate the beginning of each meeting to catching up. You can decide on a half an hour or an hour if you can afford the time, and you can leave it up to the members if they want to socialize. Then it's time to get down to business. There are different philosophies on the critiquing process. Some like to have the writer remain silent while each member takes a turn discussing his or her thoughts. You can set a time limit for each work being reviewed, such as 30 minutes, and someone can be responsible for keeping an eye on the clock. Other groups prefer being more conversational and casual. This means there's no time restriction and there's a dialogue between the writer and the readers. Some readers like to discuss their ideas back and forth as well. Whatever works for your group. However, there are a couple of things I think are essential. One is to make sure the work is critiqued ahead of time and comments are made so that you don't distract yourself with trying to critique during the group time. You'll only end up shortchanging yourself and your group. When the critique is done, all the copies should be returned to the writer so he or she can have them to refer to during the revision process. Make sure to sign your name so if there are any questions, the writer can ask you at a later date. You should read your fellow writer's work the way you want your work read. Find a quiet place to focus. Make sure you're not rushed or tired. Reading twice is important. The first time you can go through with a pen and help the writer with typos, misspellings, grammatical errors, or any style weaknesses like the overuse of adverbs. This is the foundation. The second time you read, you want to dig deeper, depending on how many pages you have in hand and whether or not you've read this person's work before. This time you can look for character development, the flow of the plot, or pacing, the themes, how language works or doesn't. If it's an academic work, you can read for clarity and consistency. Know the genre you're reading. If it's a romance or a spy thriller, don't try to make it into something it's not. Your job is to know the writer's voice and help it be as strong as it can possibly be. Leave the writer with a written note at the end. Be constructive. So try and find all the positives about the piece, whether it's the way the writer can describe place or carry out dialogue, or perhaps he's skilled at being in different characters' heads at different times. When it's time to discuss the writer's shortcomings, this is when it's time to be tactful. Ask the writer what he or she was trying to convey. Let the writer know why you felt it didn't work. And when it's your time to be critiqued, relax and don't get defensive. It's better to know if there are issues with your work than to proceed blindly. So take your time to digest what's been said, go home, wait a day or two, and then tackle the revision. Even if you only take one piece of advice, it may open the doors to new places you never anticipated. I hope this podcast helps guide you to either join or start your own writers group, and please join Expert Subjects' next podcast for more guidance for all your writing needs.